Hi everybody and welcome again to another webinar of Between the Lines Live. My name is Vanessa Rader, I'm the Head of Research here at Ray Wyatt, and I'm joined by our esteemed panel to talk about all things retail and particularly retail high strips. So I've got joining us today Zorik Thompson, who's the Director, Managing Director from RWC Eastern Suburbs, and Scott Stevens from RWC Sydney North. So welcome, guys. It's so exciting to have you.
Thank you.
I thought that this would be a really great addition to talk about retail, because retail is an asset class that, you know, it's been through the wars over the last number of years, and everyone always talks kind of about retail centres, those large centres, and that kind of evolution of what's happening in that sort of space. Are they entertainment precincts? Are they shopping precincts? The impacts of online, so many things to unpack. But let's talk today more about probably the high street retail end of town, because they're areas that you kind of operate in. So I might just start with you, Zorik. Can you tell us a little bit about what area you operate in, and also you, Scott, as well?
Yeah, so I'm obviously based in Eastern Suburbs. Primarily the business is in Bondi, Double Bay, Woollahra, Paddington. So anyway, between sort of Watsons Bay and Bondi Junction is sort of where I focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, and retail, yep.
Yeah, and so I'm based in Mossman, but we cover really anywhere on the northern side of Sydney, from say Manly all the way through to Lane Cove, and there's a lot of really good high streets in that precinct.
Yeah,
so it's
for sure. I suppose one of the major ones that everyone knows is probably that kind of Military Road, which
Yeah.
is a really long road, but you've got that real premium end, I suppose, down in Mossman.
Yeah, down in Mossman.
Yeah, so it's certainly markets that have probably bucked some of the trends that we've seen in retail. We know that during COVID in particular, that with people being at home, we did see some kind of return to people going back to their high street, so going in and getting a coffee or going and picking up a candle. And I did so many surveys during that time of different strips, and there was actually occupancy was quite high. It was hard for a lot of businesses, so we did see vacancies start to increase. But you know, it's quite good to see that people were embracing their local community and doing, you know, all things retail local, close to home. But I suppose the interesting thing is that there's been a massive evolution of what retail in these strips kind of look like. And I might start with you, Scott, talking about in particular that Military Road precinct, but feel free to talk about the other markets as well.
Yeah.
Is that retail mix is definitely, it has changed, but I think probably not changed as much for your strip as probably some others.
Yeah, look, it has and it hasn't. I mean, there's always been a couple of very distinct use groups in Military Road, Mossman, and so from Spit Junction, where it's more service focused, you come down the hill, and then you've got a really strong grouping of fashion retailers, and that fashion mix has really evolved quite strongly over the last few years, and you know, most of the Australian designers are there. There's still a lot who want to get in, and we just don't have enough shops. Basically.
That's a really interesting kind of dynamic, because what we're seeing, particularly because of online retail, is this kind of clothing and soft goods category really starting to kind of disappear a lot of our strips, and even in our big centres we're starting to see it kind of shrink in size.
Yeah.
But in your markets and yours as well, in some of your precincts, you're seeing quite a lot of that clothing, soft goods still doing
So
really well.
an interesting point that Scott is saying is a lot of these businesses who started online have got an amazing customer base and a lot of raving fans, are now approaching me and saying, all our clients are buying from Bondi or Woollahra, we want to have a shop.
Yeah.
Because people want to touch it and try it and whatever. Now that was all started through COVID, and now that it's all opened up, they're like, we want a flagship, can you find us something? As Scott said, it's not much available because no one wants to let go of their shops because the precincts are so strong. You know?
So would you say that's more of a local designer piece? Because we have seen kind of a lot of luxury retail, particularly in the cities. So we recently did a piece in Sydney CBD, and the trend is not just a Sydney trend, like this is trends that we're seeing in Melbourne, Brisbane, even in Perth, a lot of kind of luxury retail. Is that really a competition for you, or is that a different sort of tenant type that's going to your local strips?
It's Australian fashion designers, the people in the jewellery space as well. All the high-end luxury tenants are all going to Westfields of the world because they require 1,000 square metres, 500 square metres, and the Eastern Suburbs doesn't have that.
Yes.
So a lot of the tenants who have amazing online businesses, or people who are not in the areas and want to expand. You know.
Yeah,
That's the same.
and it's the same in the Lower North Shore as well. I mean, there really is. It's not that luxury brand. You rattle them off: Gucci, Chanel, Hermes.
Yeah.
That's not that. That's not what we're about. I mean, we're about young and emerging fashion designers as well, both men's and women's fashion, footwear, jewellery, homewares. There's a real plethora of uses.
And what about food? So food has obviously been, across the broader retail category, the largest kind of growth segment, because people still like to go out to eat, and there's still, our need to consume.
Yeah.
So do you still have is that a growing piece of the pie, if you like, of your strips, or is it kind of staying stable? What's your kind of food category look like?
Look, it's a mixture of restaurants, bars. A lot of the new healthy concept options have come out.
Oh, yeah.
Acai bowl concepts and frozen yogurt's back in the game again, and but yeah, like just sort of healthy sandwiches and salads.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, fish bowl was a big
Yep.
flagship out of everyone, and then a lot of people are trying to copy all the same things and change the menu a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
But I think it's sort of bars and restaurants will always want to expand. Someone who's in the CBD in Mossman wants to be in the east,
Yes.
or vice versa.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like having on their map, they're having like those businesses have Tokyo, Paris, New York. They want to have CBD, Mossman, Bondi, or
Yeah.
Double Bay. That's just the way that's how they operate.
Yeah.
And it's kind of similar in the Lower North Shore as well. I mean, it's really quite interesting. Further afield, like say Willoughby Road in Crow's Nest, is a real food hub.
Right.
So, and so we've just leased to El Jana, which is a bit of a phenomenon
Yeah.
at the moment. Chicken. It is going berserk there. But equally, there's probably I've never done the count, but there'd be probably 50 food choices on Willoughby Road in Crow's Nest. The same in Neutral Bay. There's a huge amount of food offerings. Equally in Mossman, surprisingly, there's less food offerings. Some really good cafes, a couple of really good restaurants. But the other thing, of course, is food catering. Like, we've got an amazing business in Mossman called Fourth Village, which has, been there for many, many years. And they have not only a fresh offer, fruit and veg, an amazing deli offer, an amazing sort of restaurant offer as well. So there's some really good food offerings.
Yeah. And services, obviously, the other kind of growth part of retail as well.
Yeah.
Beauty in particular, I think is one that we're seeing a lot kind of more, those kind of beauty type premises pop up.
So recently I'd been working with Mecca. And they were trading out of a relatively small space of about probably just over 100 square metres on Military Road. And we were fortunate enough that we were able to shuffle a couple of tenants around. We relocated Lululemon into a different location, which is sort of more daily needs, athletic wear and food and what have you. And then we backfilled their space with Mecca, who are now in about 250 square metres, doing incredibly well.
Yeah. And I suppose, though, that you work across a few different strips. So you may have some, you mentioned Bondi. I'm guessing that particularly with tourism here in Australia has increased a lot over the last couple of years. We're seeing all these international visitors come back to Australia. Is that resulting in a change in kind of that use, or is it heavy food? Or
Look, Campbell Parade is primarily heavy food. Sort of similar to sort of Manly the Corso. It's a lot of different types of businesses, but primarily it is. That's sort of the national fast food chains.
Okay.
And then you've got Hall Street, which has more of the local businesses. But the thing is, like, we just did a deal with Style Runner, who they used to be on Gould Street.
Yes.
But they wanted to stay in Bondi. They were sort of out of the game for about 6 months because nothing was available.
Yes.
Something came up, and they just took something on Hall Street.
Okay.
So a lot of the fashion is probably the same scenario in Mossman. If there's something available within a certain amount of radius, it doesn't matter, they'll take it.
Yeah.
It's more about supply because demand's so high.
So you're seeing occupancy, like
Yeah.
you really don't have very little vacancy.
If something comes up, it's either done before it goes to the market or it's snapped up within You know,
Yeah.
it's very quickly.
It depends on, there's a real sweet spot for fashion on what I found on Military Road, for example, like in terms of size, and
Yes.
that sits between about 80 and 120 square metres.
Mm-hmm.
If it's smaller than that, it sometimes struggles a little bit. They move and they're great shops, but the sweet spot for these fashion retailers in particular is between 80 and 120 metres.
Yeah.
So the larger tenancies as well, they can sometimes sit for a little while,
Yes.
but eventually somebody really good comes along. So
Yeah. Well, that's a really good news story for all your landlords then,
Mm.
keeping your occupancy high.
Yep.
So what does that mean for rents? Have you seen much shift in rents or incentives? I'm assuming there's probably little incentive for a lot of these
Yeah.
assets.
Yeah, look, a lot of our clients are privates, and you know they know that there is demand, and tenants know. They all talk to each other. They all know what's going on.
Yeah.
So yeah, they don't get crazy incentives,
Yeah.
but landlords are happy to help out
Yeah.
for the right tenants and the right terms. But yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting out there.
Yeah, and I'm the same. You know, on the North Shore, you know, it does depend a little bit. Let's say it's a 5-year lease. You know, might be a little bit of rent free to start up, but that's about it. That's really the trend.
Yeah.
And
Well,
has
it's
been
a
for-
supply and demand thing.
Yeah.
You've got that kind of demand there,
Yeah.
so there's only, there is an infinite supply in these markets. And if you want to be there,
Mm.
like you said, you want to have your name up on the door and you have those kind of locations,
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
not a lot of
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah, and they sort of pay a bit of a premium as well because they factor in the advertising cost.
Yeah. Okay,
that's,
fair enough.
how they factor it in.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and look, obviously that reflects through to rents as well. So rents have held up very, very well,
Mhm.
through the whole COVID thing, when I think we handled it really well on the North Shore, and when everyone came back out again, they wanted to be out in the open air.
Yes.
And so, I think we really benefited from that at that particular time.
Yeah, and I think that's where centres, like big retail centres, really kind of didn't struggle because that was that open air part.
Yeah.
Because people wanted to be out, but they were still some concern regarding hygiene and stuff. They felt much more comfortable. That's why
Yeah.
we've probably seen when you look at centres,
Yeah.
during that time, those kind of small neighbourhoods or those sub-regional centres that had maybe like parking in the middle, and you just kind of walked into the shops. It was actually kind of the flavour of the year
Yeah.
or 2 years it was in
Yeah.
particular.
I think what holds, say, Mossman, for example, in really good stead is, okay, we've got Chatswood, we've got the CBD, we've got Warringah Mall, but in terms of the local demographic, there really isn't a shopping centre. I
That's
mean,
right.
there is Bridgepoint, which has Harris Farm and an IGA and an Aldi and 40 shops, but it's a different environment, and so that's really held the high street in good stead.
Yeah, that's right. But then if we would probably, just talking on that point, would be the impacts of, say, a Bondi Junction. Like, I know that the whole renovation of Bondi Junction was quite some time ago, and knowing that Oxford Street precinct,
Yeah.
watching it over the last 20 years,
Yep.
it was super vibrant. Then it got really, really quiet. A lot of those clothing in particular moved out.
Yep.
How is that strip in particular? Because it's occupancy is really high there now. How have a lot of those strips kind of coped with having those nearby large centres? I think you called it a shopping sandwich.
The Westfield sandwich. So yeah, Oxford Street obviously was in between the CBD and Bondi Junction,
Yeah,
and I think it's just the change of the guard.
yeah,
I think the big factor in Paddington was Justin Hems.
Yeah.
He's brought a lot of people to the area, setting up all these new restaurants and bars,
yes.
and that sort of gives.
It's improved the vibrancy.
It
'cause
has.
yeah,
It has, and obviously there's different types of tenant mixes have changed. The rents did come off a lot.
Yes.
Back in the day, Oxford Street was, sitting at $1,500 to $2,000 a square metre.
well, it was
and
a premium strip.
yeah,
wasn't
it was a premium strip, and a lot of those businesses have sort of moved out of there. But there's there's services, there's gyms, a couple of new restaurants have opened up, and hotel. Like there's a bit of been new development there as well.
Yes.
And like I said, people love going into a shopping village rather than a shopping centre.
Yes.
It's the experience. It's the cafe.
Yeah.
It's the
Yeah.
there's a lot of different things to do besides driving to a car park and being in an
Yeah.
indoor
Oh, yeah,
facility.
yeah.
People love that, and it's changed.
And like the strips that you guys operate in are really the super prime, if you like, of strips in Sydney. But so it's not all markets are seeing that same sort of result. So if you look at a lot of the kind of small little strips, they haven't recovered post-COVID. But then there is parts of the community that really do like that kind of access and that local accessibility of their local shops. Like I live down south in Gymea Bay, and that Gymea strip, there's not a vacancy there. There's food going in. We've done some work looking at Cronulla Mall as well, and we've watched that vacancy, and I thought that vacancy was going to actually kind of grow out a little bit, but it really didn't. Even though there was a lot of construction going on, that didn't hamper people wanting to, walk the mall and go into the shop and buy a candle or buy, a pair of tights and go drink a coffee. So it's different in different places, and around the country it's going to be different as well. But it's great to see that. The reliance back on that local strip. It's nice. Yeah. It's nice to have that community.
Yeah.
It is. It's sort of, I live in where I work, and it's, it's lovely to have that. I appreciate as a local consumer having that on my doorstep.
Yes.
It really does add a lot to the community.
And while we're talking about your doorstep, because that's Mossman, I want to quickly mention the Woolworths.
Yes.
Because I remember going past there, and there would have been a lot of kind of uproar a little bit about the idea of Woolworths coming into that strip, because you said you've got the centre at the top that has the Aldi and stuff, but having it on the strip was a very different kind of different dynamic.
It was, and it was an interesting move. The problem is for Woolworths and Coles in the lower North Shore is there's just not the land to create a supermarket.
Yes.
And so you've got 3 supermarkets in Neutral Bay, which is only a few kilometres away from Mossman, for example. But Woolworths were able to pull together a smaller site for a metro.
Yes.
There was a lot of community backlash at the time, and that was predominantly because of the fear, I guess, of what Woolworths may do to the local bread shop,
greengrocer and all that.
butcher,
you've got such beautiful
greengrocer,
and stuff there.
But I don't think that's necessarily happened.
No.
I mean, they've been up and trading now since just before Christmas. And yes, it's convenient, and yes, they stay open till later. But I having spoken to a lot of the local operators, business is still, there's enough market share.
And they did a beautiful job.
Yeah, they did.
So was it 3 shops that they...
No, it would have been about 4 or 5 shops that they were able to amalgamate. Yeah. And they did do it. They kept the heritage facades. That worked really well.
It's difficult in that market, which brings me on to the kind of the investment side of things. Like I said, shopping centres this year, we've started to see a real uptick in investment activity, particularly that sub-regional space. We're starting to see yields kind of change a little bit for it to be a bit more attractive for buyers to jump in. Yeah. But there's not a lot of transactions that we usually see in these sort of strips. They really don't follow the same trends that we see in the broader markets. Have you had many kind of much activity this year, Scott, or the last 18 months?
It's interesting. This year, more so than previously, after the Christmas break, I've come back and there's a lot more people talking about selling, predominantly because it's sort of some type of generational thing. But when you have, we've spoken about rents and vacancy and all. When you have something that is so strong, you don't let go of it generally. So, I'm launching a property tomorrow in Mossman. It's the second time it's sold in over 100 years.
Wow.
So
that's really the definition of tightly held market.
That is very tightly held.
Is that the heading? Is that the heading? Tightly held?
Tightly held, exactly. So, but look, and the other thing, there's huge demand from people downsizing from big homes on the Lower North Shore. So, what I've found, particularly over the last 10 or more years, is sites being pulled together so that 3 or 4 buildings get amalgamated, and there's a new development, retail, mixed use, retail underneath with luxury apartments above.
Yeah.
So there's been quite a bit of that as well.
Yeah, well, that's that helps solve the whole housing issue. Like, I know that there's the premium price for these assets, but like you said, there is those downsizing markets where that's an appropriate sort of end product for those people. Yeah. And it brings some new high quality retail as well, because a lot of the stuff, you've got beautiful buildings, don't get me wrong, but they're old.
Yeah.
And, particularly if they're generational assets, may not have seen the right amount of capex to
Yes.
keep them up to speed and things.
Yep.
So
Yep.
I'm
Yep.
sure that's something
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
your property managers have the pleasure of dealing with regularly.
Yeah.
And how about across the east? Is that well, there's been some recent kind of talk about increasing densities, particularly in these kind of centres,
Yeah.
which is probably going to make assets more tightly held, one would think.
And delay people's decisions of
Yeah.
who are thinking about it, because obviously there's this pie in the sky discussion about, you know, if you bought properties 400 metres from this centre or 800 metres, there's potentially get 6 to 8 stories.
Yes.
But in general, in the eastern suburbs, it's very similar to Mossman. Similar profile families.
Yeah.
There's very rarely as much debt on these properties, and there's no reason to sell. If they do sell, they're like, where am I going to put the money?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they're
Such
getting
a problem
they're
to
getting
have.
yeah, exactly. They're getting such a good return from their cost base, or they've owned
Yeah.
it for 30, 40 years.
And they're not going to sell it at a 200 basis point yield increase like other
Yeah.
assets will, because there's no incentive to do so.
Correct.
Like,
Yeah.
what are they going to do with the money? Like, there's
Correct.
no urgency for them to need to sell.
Yes.
So
Correct.
that's why they're held on to.
Yeah, so the things that are sort of moving are properties that are potentially vacant, where an owner-occupier can pay a premium for something. That's where it starts engaging people, vendors. But yeah, the investment side of things is on shops and residences or mixed-use stuff. But a lot of we do a lot of block of units. I wouldn't say a lot, but we are focusing on that. And the block of unit space is a different valuation in theory.
It is.
You know,
I know this is a retail chat, but off that block of unit, Mark, we're going to do a webinar in the next couple of months just talking about that space, because particularly with the housing supply issues we're seeing across the country, it's not just a Sydney story. We'll get some people talking across states as well on that.
Yeah.
But it's how well has that asset class gone?
Yeah, and it's just a set and forget, long-term investment, leave it to my kids sort of thing.
Yes.
You know, and they're happy to. Because the thing is, when you buy commercial property, investors are always thinking about, is the business going to survive? What the rent's going to be when the market review comes up? There's a lot of questions they need to ask.
Yeah.
But with blocks of units, you just know it's always going to be leased in good areas.
You mentioned just something on the review process. We just go back to that kind of leasing space again. What do your reviews look like in your leases? We've had these kind of huge numbers in terms of CPI.
Yeah.
Are your owners looking for kind of fixed interest, or is it different, regardless who they are? Are tenants more kind of sophisticated and don't want that CPI increase?
On the new leases, you mean?
On the new leases.
Yeah. So look, in the main, most of let's say we've got a 5-year lease, and unlike a shopping centre, a lot of our owners are very happy to offer options for longevity for the tenant in the space, but fixed annual increases range anywhere between, say, 3 and 5%.
Okay.
And look, it probably would average out at about 4% fixed annual increase. Yeah.
Which is where CPI is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You know, but are you finding a lot of the new leases, tenants are wanting fixed increase of the option or a market review? What's the balance?
Look, no, I haven't really had much pushback on a fixed increase at the option.
Okay.
So most people are still, there is a market review at the option take up, and it's a fair resale. I mean, the Retail Leases Act is, was put in place to be fair to both parties, but it really does put a real market reset on the value.
Yeah, like a lot of my clients are happy to do a fixed increase because it removes all the potential issues of arguing about what the rent should be and this and that and getting valuers. So there's been a lot of a big shift in my space where vendors are like, I'm happy with the fixed increase. The tenant's happy with it because they know what the rent's going to be.
They know what their expenses are going to be looking ahead.
Yeah.
So opportunities. I think we kind of spoke about this mixed use kind of idea is probably a great opportunity. But you mentioned that possible raise in the densities and things in your kind of markets. Will that see, if we do see kind of that mixed use buildings kind of come up, will that increase that retail component that is in your areas?
Of course, yeah. I mean, if you know there's going to be 5,000 square metres or 400 units or 500 units being built in the area, you're going to be pretty confident you're going to have some customers. So I think it's similar to what happened in Double Bay in the last couple of years, where the developer Fortis has built a lot of these office buildings and obviously created some amazing food precincts and restaurants. Even now that I'm talking to people and saying, if you invest in Double Bay, you know, you're going to have, or open a shop in Double Bay, you're going to have 5,000 square metres of office in the next 5 years.
Yes.
Mm.
It gives people comfort. You
Yeah.
know, there's people going to be in the area, and at least you're going to have some customers possibly.
Yeah, well, you're going to have the residents now that are living there,
Yeah.
so it's, you know, yeah, right at your doorstep.
Yeah.
And you think the more of that amalgamation of sites is...
Look, it's yes is the answer, but it's not easy putting these sites
No.
together. I've just done one in the last month, which was a very long work in progress, and it was quite a unique proposition. We were able to get two families together and amalgamate a 1,300 square metre site on Military Road.
Wow.
And so that actually set a record price in Mossman. But, you know, the buyer of that was definitely going to, it's a mixed-use redevelopment play.
Yeah.
So, you know, once you get up to sort of, you know, 3, 4, 5 levels, views both directions back to the city, back to Balmoral and the Heads, with some really good retail underneath. So, yeah.
And there's, it looks like that you're plenty of tenants knocking on the door looking
Yeah.
for some retail
Yeah.
space, so especially that kind of new high-quality stuff.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's been a really interesting chat, guys. I really appreciate you coming in. I know that today was really a very New South Wales specific story.
Mm.
However, there is markets across the country that operate exactly the same sort of way, those premium strips.
Yeah.
So it's certainly one to think about. A lot of people think, you know, is retail a thriving asset class or is it a little bit dead? And I think the answer is it really just depends on where you are and
Yeah.
what that retail is. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
you guys have some really great examples of what's going on. And if you want to lease any space, get in contact with the guys. There might not be anything. And if you want to buy something, yeah, that might be a bit difficult too. So thanks so much to
Thanks, Vanessa.
Scott and
Thanks,
Zoe
Vanessa.
for coming and chatting to us about all things retail, in particular the high street retail. And I'll just end and mention that we have our next Between the Lines Live, which is going to be up in Brisbane. It's on the 15th of May, and we'll be joined by Mark Creevy, who's part of our special projects team, and also Ash Forbes from Valuations, where we talk about kind of the Englobo land subdivisions, what's happening in that land space in South East Queensland in particular, because another market who is definitely suffering from that housing supply issue that we have seen around the country. So thanks, guys. Nice to see
Thanks,
you.
Vanessa.
And thank you for everyone for tuning in. As always, this will be loaded up on Spotify in the next sort of 24 hours. So if you know someone that might be interested, just jump online and listen into that and listen to our previous editions as well. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.